She stared at the 2 crumpled dollar bills resting on the pristine white tablecloth, her hands trembling with a mix of exhaustion and pure rage. It was a slap in the face. The man in the Italian suit had occupied her table for 3 hours, demanded specialized service, and racked up a bill over $300, only to leave her a tip that wouldn't even buy a bus ticket. Tears stung Elena's eyes as she snatched up the plate to clear it, mentally calculating which bill she would have to skip this month. But as she lifted the cold ceramic, a small, heavy, cream-colored envelope slid out from underneath. It wasn't money. It was a note with 6 words that would endanger her life and change her destiny forever. I know what you did yesterday. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall. It hammered against the glass windows of Miller's Steakhouse like it was trying to break in. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of searing ribeyes, stale coffee, and damp wool coats. Elena Vance wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, checking the clock on the wall. 9:45 p.m. 15 minutes until closing. Her feet throbbed in her worn-out non-slip shoes, a dull ache that had become her constant companion over the last 6 months. Every step sent a sharp jolt up her shins, but she forced a smile as she navigated through the dining room. She couldn't afford to look tired. Not when the manager, a man named Rick, slightly too fond of shouting, was watching the floor like a hawk. "Table 4 needs a refill, Elena. Move it!" Rick barked from the pass, slamming a plate of calamari down for another server. Elena nodded, grabbing the water pitcher. On it. Her mind, however, wasn't on the water. It was on the terrifying voicemail she had received on her break. It was from the billing department at Mercy General Hospital. Her mother's cardiac surgery was scheduled for Thursday, but the insurance had kicked back the claim again. They needed a deposit of $5,000 by Wednesday morning, or the surgery would be cancelled. Elena had exactly $342 in her bank account. She approached table 4. It was the best table in the house, a semi-private booth usually reserved for couples celebrating anniversaries. Tonight it was occupied by a single man. He was older, perhaps in his late 70s, with hair the color of steel wool and a face carved from granite. He wore a suit that Elena, even with her limited knowledge of fashion, knew cost more than her car. It was charcoal grey, perfectly tailored, with a silk tie that shimmered under the dim restaurant lights. But despite the expensive clothes, the man, Mr. Arthur Penhaligon, as the reservation stated, was a nightmare. "You're late," Arthur said without looking up from his newspaper. His voice was dry and scratchy, like sandpaper on wood. "I apologize, sir," Elena said, her voice steady. "Would you like more water?" "I asked for sparkling. This is tap. I can smell the chlorine," he snapped, finally looking up. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue, devoid of any warmth. "Do you enjoy serving swill to paying customers, or is it just incompetence?" Elena gripped the pitcher tighter, her knuckles turning white. It was the 3rd time he had sent something back. First, the steak was too pedestrian. Then the wine was corked. It wasn't. Now the water. "I'll get you a fresh bottle of San Pellegrino immediately, sir," she said, swallowing her pride. She needed this job. She needed the tips. "Don't bother," Arthur waved his hand dismissively. "Just bring me the check. I've lost my appetite." Elena felt a cold pit in her stomach. A walkout on a $300 ticket would be deducted from her tips if Rick was feeling particularly vindictive. But Arthur didn't walk out. He pulled out a black leather wallet, produced a sleek black credit card, and slapped it on the table. "Process it, quickly." Elena ran the card. It was an invite-only Centurion card. The machine approved it instantly. She returned with the receipt and the pen, forcing one last polite smile. "Thank you for dining with us, Mr. Penhaligon. Have a good night," he grunted, not making eye contact, and scribbled on the receipt. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with slow, deliberate movements, and walked out into the rainy night without a backward glance. Elena rushed to the table. The bill was $350.50. Usually, on a bill that size, a decent tip would be $60. A generous one would be $80. $60 would pay for her mother's medication for the week. She picked up the leather folder. She opened it. 0. He had drawn a line through the tip section. Elena's heart stopped. She stared at it, blinking, thinking maybe she was seeing things. But then she looked at the table. Under the rim of his empty dinner plate, $2 bills were poking out. 2 single-dollar bills. It was worse than leaving nothing. Nothing could be an accident. Maybe he forgot. $2 was a message. It was a deliberate insult. It said, "This is what you are worth." "Hey, table 4 clear?" Rick shouted from across the room. "Yeah," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "It's clear." She felt the tears welling up. Hot, angry tears. She grabbed the plate, ready to hurl it into the bus tub in the back. She snatched the 2 pathetic dollar bills to crumble them up. But as she lifted the plate, she saw it. It wasn't just the $2. Tucked completely underneath the plate, shielded from view, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't sealed. Elena frowned. Had he forgotten it? She looked around. The restaurant was emptying out. Rick was in the office. She wiped her hands on her apron and picked up the envelope. It felt heavy, high-quality paper. She opened the flap and pulled out a single index card. There was no money inside, just handwritten text in elegant, sharp calligraphy. Elena read the words, and the noise of the restaurant faded into a buzzing silence. The anger about the tip evaporated, replaced by a cold dread that froze her blood. The note read, "I know what you did at the pharmacy yesterday. Meet me at 4200 Skyline Belvedere at midnight. Come alone, or the police get the footage." Elena dropped the card. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up next to the $2. Her breath hitched in her throat. Yesterday. The pharmacy. She had been at the pharmacy counter, begging the pharmacist to give her mother the heart medication, digoxin, even though her card had been declined. The pharmacist had refused. Desperate, terrified that her mother's heart would stop in the night, Elena had waited until the pharmacist turned his back. She had reached over the counter, grabbed the small orange bottle, and slipped it into her purse. It was the first crime she had ever committed in her 24 years of life. She had stolen $12 worth of medicine to save her mother. And the billionaire in the expensive suit knew. Eleanor stood frozen in the middle of the dining room, the sounds of clattering silverware and the dishwasher's hum sounding like they were underwater. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. How? How could a stranger, a man she had never met, a man who ate $300 steaks, know about a petty theft in a pharmacy across town? "Elena! Earth to Elena!" She jumped, gasping. Her co-worker, Sarah, was staring at her with concern. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Did that old grouch stiff you?" Elena scrambled to pick up the note, shoving it deep into her apron pocket, along with the $2. Yeah. He left $2. "What a scumbag," Sarah scoffed, stacking plates. "Rich people are the worst. Forget about him, hun. Let's get out of here." Elena nodded mechanically. "Yeah. I need to go." She finished her shift in a haze. Every time the door chimed, she flinched, expecting police officers to walk in with handcuffs, but no one came. By the time she clocked out, it was 11:15 p.m. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour. Elena sat in her rusted 2008 Honda Civic, the engine struggling to turn over. She gripped the steering wheel, staring at the note again, under the dim yellow interior light. 4200 Skyline Belvedere. She knew the area. It was the Highlands, the most exclusive gated community in Seattle. It was where the tech moguls and old money lived. It was miles away from the cramped apartment she shared with her mother in the South End. I should go home, she whispered to herself. I should pack our bags and run. But run where? She had no money. Her mother was too sick to travel. And if this man had footage, if he turned it in, Elena would go to jail. Who would care for her mother then? The state would put Beatrice in a county facility, and she would die there alone. Elena gritted her teeth. She had no choice. She put the car in gear and drove toward the hills. The drive took 30 minutes. As she climbed the winding roads, the houses became larger, hidden behind massive iron gates and towering hedges. The streetlights here were golden and elegant, unlike the flickering blue LEDs of her neighborhood. She arrived at 4200 Skyline Belvedere at 11:55 p.m. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress, a massive stone estate that looked more like a European castle than a home. The gate was closed, a formidable barrier of black iron and spikes. Elena killed the engine. She sat in the dark, the rain drumming on the roof. Okay, Elena. Just talk to him. Beg him. Tell him why you did it. She stepped out into the rain, pulling her thin coat tighter around her. She approached the intercom box at the gate. Before she could even press the button, a buzz sounded, and the massive gates began to swing open slowly. He was watching. She got back in her car and drove up the long, winding driveway. The landscaping was impeccable, lit by uplights that cast dramatic shadows against the trees. She parked in front of the main entrance, her Honda looking like a piece of scrap metal against the backdrop of the mansion. The front door, a massive slab of oak, opened before she reached it. Standing in the doorway was not Arthur Penhaligon. It was a younger man, perhaps in his 30s, wearing a suit that was strictly business. He had sharp features, rimless glasses, and an expression of utter indifference. "Miss Vance," the man said. It wasn't a question. "Mr. Penhaligon is expecting you in the library. Please follow me." "Who are you?" Elena asked, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "I am Marcus Sterling, Mr. Penhaligon's personal attorney." Elena followed him inside. The foyer was breathtaking. Marble floors, a chandelier that looked like a waterfall of crystals, and art on the walls that she recognized from textbooks. But the air was cold, sterile. Sterling led her down a long hallway, lined with portraits of stern-looking men. They stopped at a set of double doors. Sterling opened them and stepped aside. "Go in." Elena stepped into the library. It was a cavernous room, filled with the scent of old paper and tobacco. Walls of books stretched to the ceiling. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth. Arthur Penhaligon sat in a wingback leather chair by the fire. He was no longer wearing his suit jacket. He was in a silk dressing gown, looking smaller and frailer than he had at the restaurant. But his eyes were just as sharp. He didn't turn around. He simply gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Sit." Elena walked forward, her legs feeling like lead. She sat on the edge of the chair, clutching her purse. "Did you bring the police?" Arthur asked quietly. "No," Elena said. "Good. Because I don't like the police. They are blunt instruments for delicate problems." Arthur turned to face her. "You are wondering why you are here." "You threatened me," Elena said, a spark of anger cutting through her fear. "You left a note saying you knew I stole medication for my dying mother. You tipped me $2 and then blackmailed me to come to your house. Is this a game to you? Do you enjoy torturing poor people?" Arthur stared at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, a small, dry chuckle escaped his lips. "Fire," he muttered. "I like that. Most people in your position would be weeping by now. Begging." He reached for a glass of brandy on the side table. "I didn't threaten you, Miss Vance. I offered you a transaction. You see, I was in the pharmacy yesterday. I was in the back, consulting with the owner about business. I saw what you did. I saw the desperation, and I saw the precision. You didn't take the OxyContin. You didn't take the cash. You took digoxin, generic." "My mother has congestive heart failure," Elena said defiantly. "They wouldn't approve the claim." "I know," Arthur said. "I own the insurance company." Elena's mouth fell open. "What?" "United Health Frontiers, a subsidiary of Penhaligon Industries. I am the reason your claim was denied. Or rather, my algorithms are." Elena stood up, her hands balling into fists. You monster! You denied her surgery. You're killing her." "Sit down!" Arthur's voice cracked like a whip. Elena froze, then slowly sank back into the chair. "My algorithms are designed for profit, Miss Vance. That is the nature of business. But I am not a machine. I am a dying man." Arthur leaned forward, the firelight casting deep shadows on his face. "And I am surrounded by vultures. My nephew, Julian, my board of directors, even my own staff. They are all waiting for me to die so they can pick the meat from my bones." He reached into his robe pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He tossed it to her. Elena caught it. She opened it. Inside was a pair of cufflinks, heavy, gold, encrusted with diamonds. "Those are worth $50,000, Arthur said. "I want you to steal them." Elena looked up, confused. "What?" "I have a problem, Miss Vance. I have a family of liars and thieves who are very good at pretending to be honest. I need someone who is honest about being a thief." Arthur leaned back, his eyes gleaming. "I don't want to turn you in for the pharmacy theft. I want to hire you. I will pay for your mother's surgery. I will wipe your debt. I will give you a salary of $10,000 a month." "In exchange for what?" Elena whispered. "In exchange for your life for the next 6 months, Arthur said. "You aren't going to be a waitress anymore. You are going to move into this house. You are going to pretend to be my illegitimate granddaughter, recently found." Elena shook her head. "That's insane. No one will believe that." "They will," Arthur said, "because I have the paperwork to prove it. But that's not the hard part." He pointed a bony finger at her. "The hard part is that my nephew Julian will try to destroy you. He wants the inheritance. If he finds out you are a fraud, you go to prison for fraud and grand larceny. If you survive 6 months until my expected departure, you get $5 million. If you fail, or if you break character, I release the footage from the pharmacy." Arthur smiled, a cruel, thin smile. "So, Elena, do you want the job, or should I call the police?" The silence in the library was heavier than the oak doors sealing them inside. Elena stared at the crackling fire, the flames reflecting in the $50,000 diamonds in her hand. "I can't do it," she whispered. "I'm not an actress. I'm a waitress. I drop forks when I'm nervous." "And I," Arthur said, taking a slow sip of his brandy, "am a man who doesn't accept no from anyone, let alone someone who just committed a felony on camera." He pressed a button on a small remote on the side table. The large flat-screen television, hidden behind a painting of a hunt scene, hummed to life. The screen flickered, showing black and white, grainy footage. It was the pharmacy counter. Elena saw herself. She saw the fear in her own eyes, the darting glances, the quick hand snatching the orange bottle. It was undeniable proof. The police would call it larceny, Arthur narrated calmly. But given the value of the drug and the premeditation, my lawyers could argue for burglary. 3 to 5 years. Beatrice Vance would be dead within 3 weeks of your incarceration. Elena felt sick. She looked at Arthur with pure hatred. You planned this. You were waiting for someone desperate. Desperation is the only honest emotion left in this world, Arthur replied. So, do we have a deal? Eleanor closed her eyes. She thought of her mother, Beatrice, lying in the hospital bed, her breathing ragged, her skin grey. She thought of the final notice bills piled on their kitchen table. Fine, Elena said, her voice hollow. I'll do it. Arthur didn't smile. He simply nodded to Marcus Sterling, the lawyer standing in the shadows. Draft the papers. Transfer the funds to Mercy General. Schedule the surgery for tomorrow morning. The next 24 hours were a blur of terrifying efficiency. Elena was whisked away, not to a prison cell, but to a guest suite in the east wing of the Penhaligon estate that was 3 times the size of her apartment. She wasn't allowed to go home to pack. Marcus sent a team to sanitize her apartment. They packed her mother's things and moved them to a private care facility paid for by the Penhaligon Trust. Elena was told her old life was essentially paused. By Friday afternoon, Elena stood in front of a floor-to-length mirror in her new bedroom. She was wearing a dress that Marcus had provided, a structured navy sheath dress by Roland Mouret. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, had been cut and styled by a woman who didn't speak a word of English, but wielded scissors like a surgeon. She looked like a stranger. She looked expensive. Lesson 1. Arthur's voice came from the doorway. He was leaning on a cane now, looking every bit the frail patriarch. Never look at the floor. Servants look at the floor. Penhaligons look through people. Elena turned. I feel ridiculous. You look like my granddaughter, Arthur said. Or rather, you look like what my granddaughter would have looked like had my son not been an idiot who died in a motorcycle crash in 1995 without leaving any heirs. What is my story? Elena asked. If I'm going to lie to your family, I need to know the lie. Your name is Elena, Arthur said. That part we keep. It's easier for you to react to. But you are not Elena Vance. You are Elena Penhaligon. My son, Thomas, had a brief affair in Paris in 1994. The mother kept you a secret. She died recently, and you found my name in her papers. You reached out. We did a DNA test. It was a match. And the DNA test? Elena asked. What if they check? I own the lab, Elena. Arthur sighed, as if explaining something to a child. The paper trail is already established. Birth certificates, letters, medical records. It's ironclad. Why? Elena asked, finally asking the question that had been gnawing at her. Why go through all this trouble? Why not just hire a bodyguard if you're afraid of your nephew? Arthur hobbled into the room and sat on a velvet ottoman. For a second, the mask of the ruthless billionaire slipped, and Elena saw a tired, frightened old man. Because Julian doesn't want to kill me, Elena. He wants to declare me mentally incompetent. He wants to prove that I am senile so he can take control of the company board before I die. If he succeeds, he will liquidate everything. He will fire thousands of employees. He will tear apart my legacy to buy yachts and politicians. Arthur looked up, his eyes steel again. But if I have an heir, a direct blood heir who I have just found, It freezes his claim. It buys me time to restructure the company so he can never touch it. You are my shield, Elena." A knock came at the door downstairs. A heavy, booming knock. Arthur checked his watch. "Showtime. That will be Julian and his wife, Victoria. They are coming for tea. They think they are here to discuss my retirement home." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Remember," Arthur whispered, gripping her arm with surprising strength. "You are not a waitress. You own the restaurant. You own the block the restaurant sits on. Breathe that air. If you falter, they will eat you alive." They walked down the grand staircase together. In the foyer stood two people who looked like they had stepped out of a magazine ad for misery. Julian Penhaligon was tall, perhaps 40, with slicked-back dark hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wore a suit that fit too perfectly. Beside him was Victoria, a blonde woman with ice-pick posture and a Birkin bag held like a weapon. "Uncle Arthur," Julian said, his voice smooth and oily. "We were worried. You weren't answering your phone." "I was busy," Arthur said, descending the last step. Julian's eyes drifted to Eleanor. He didn't look at her face first. He looked at her shoes, then her dress, assessing her value. "I see you have company," Julian said, his tone suggesting the company was a prostitute or a nurse. "Family, actually," Arthur said. He put a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Julian, Victoria, I'd like you to meet Eleanor, my granddaughter." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Julian blinked. Once, twice. The smile didn't waver, but the skin around his eyes tightened. "I wasn't aware Thomas had children, considering he's been dead for 30 years. "Neither was I," Arthur lied smoothly. "Until last month. It's a long story. We'll discuss it over tea." He walked past them toward the drawing room. Eleanor forced herself to follow, chin up, looking through them, just as Arthur had said. As she passed Julian, he stepped into her path. He smelled of expensive cologne and aggression. "Nice to meet you, Elena," he said softly, extending a hand. Elena took it. His grip was firm, crushing. "You have very rough hands for a Penhaligon," Julian whispered, his thumb grazing a callus on her palm, a souvenir from carrying hot plates for 5 years. Elena pulled her hand away, her heart racing. "I've had to work for a living," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Something I'm sure you know nothing about." Julian's eyebrows shot up. He laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Feisty. I like that. Be careful, Elena. This house has a lot of stairs. It's easy to fall." The tea service was a battlefield. They sat in the drawing room, surrounded by oil paintings of ancestors who seemed to be judging Elena's posture. A maid, who Elena recognized as a regular customer at the steakhouse, a woman named Maria, poured tea. Elena had to fight the urge to say, "Hi, Maria," or help her with the tray. She had to sit still. "So, Elena," Victoria said, stirring her Earl Grey with a silver spoon. "Where have you been living? Paris, was it?" "Lyon?" Elena said, reciting the script. "My mother preferred the quiet." "And what did you do there?" Victoria pressed, her eyes scanning Elena's face for cracks. "Did you study? The Sorbonne?" "I studied art history," Elena lied. "But mostly I cared for my mother. She was ill for a long time." "How noble," Julian said, popping a cucumber sandwich into his mouth. "And yet you have an American accent. Pacific Northwest, specifically. A bit of a twang on the vowels." Elena froze. "My mother was American. We spoke English at home." "Of course," Julian smiled. "And now you're here. Just in time for the reading of the quarterly trust reports. How convenient." "Enough, Julian," Arthur snapped. "Elena is here because she is family, She will be staying in the East Wing." "Permanently?" Victoria asked, her grip on the teacup tightening. "As long as she likes," Arthur said. "I am updating my will next week to include her." The clatter of china was the only sound. Julian set his cup down slowly. The mask of politeness was gone. He looked at Arthur with cold, reptilian fury. "You're making a mistake, Arthur. You barely know this girl. She could be anyone. A grifter, a con artist." "I have the DNA results," Arthur said. "DNA can be faked," Julian countered. "I want my own test done. Independent lab." "You will get nothing." Arthur stood up, trembling with rage. "This is my house, my money, my heir. If you disrespect her again, I will cut you off completely. Do not test me, Julian." Julian stood up slowly. He smoothed his jacket. He looked at Elena, and for the first time, she saw not just arrogance, but danger. True danger. "Welcome to the family, Elena," Julian said softly. "We're going to have so much fun." He signaled to Victoria, and they swept out of the room. As soon as the front door slammed, Elena collapsed back onto the sofa. Her hands were shaking so hard the teacup rattled in its saucer. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows I'm lying." "He suspects," Arthur corrected, sitting back down. "Suspicions are not proof. He will try to dig. He will try to scare you, but he cannot touch you as long as you stay in this house." "I can't stay here for 6 months," Elena said. "He looked at me like he wanted to strangle me." "He does," Arthur said matter-of-factly. "That means we are winning." 3 days passed. Elena settled into a routine. Mornings were spent with Arthur, learning the history of the company, the names of board members, and the complex web of lies that was her new life. Afternoons were spent with the etiquette coach Arthur had hired, a stern woman named Mrs. Galloway, who taught Elena how to walk, how to eat oysters, and how to pronounce Givenchy. It was exhausting, but every evening, Eleanor received a text from the private nurse at the care facility. Beatrice had a good day. She sat up and ate soup. Beatrice is responding well to the new meds. Those texts were the fuel that kept Eleanor going. On the 4th night, Arthur announced there would be a gala, the Penhaligon Foundation Charity Ball. It was the event of the season. 500 of Seattle's elite would be there. "This is your debut," Arthur said. "If you survive this, you are untouchable. If you crack, we are both finished." The night of the gala, the mansion was transformed. The ballroom was filled with fresh roses, a live orchestra played waltzes, and champagne flowed like water. Elena wore a custom emerald green gown that cost more than a Honda Civic. She wore the diamond necklace Arthur had given her, a heavy, cold weight around her throat. She walked into the ballroom on Arthur's arm. The flash of cameras was blinding. The whispers started immediately. "Who is she?" "Is that the granddaughter?" "She's stunning." Elena smiled until her face hurt. She shook hands with senators and tech CEOs. She repeated her backstory until it felt almost real. She was grabbing a glass of water near the bar when she felt a hand on her elbow. She turned. It was Julian. He wasn't smiling this time. He looked serious. "Enjoying the party?" he asked. "It's lovely," Elena said, trying to pull away. "I visited the pharmacy today," Julian said. Elena's blood turned to ice. She stopped moving. The room seemed to spin. "Which pharmacy?" she managed to ask. "The one on 4th and Pike," Julian said, leaning in close, his breath hot on her ear. "The one where a young woman with your exact height and build stole a bottle of heart medication 5 days ago." Elena couldn't breathe. Arthur had said he had the footage. He implied he had destroyed it or secured it. "The pharmacist was very helpful," Julian continued. "He remembers you. He remembers you crying about your mother's insurance. Mercy General, right?" He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and slipped it into Elena's hand. "I know who you are, Elena Vance. I know you're a waitress at Miller's Steakhouse. I know your mother is at the Cedar Grove Care Facility, paid for by my uncle." Elena looked around frantically. Arthur was across the room, talking to the governor. She was trapped. "What do you want?" she hissed. Julian smiled. "I don't want to turn you in. That would be boring, and it would hurt the family name to have a scandal like this." He took a sip of his champagne. "I want you to stay. I want you to be Arthur's granddaughter. But you work for me now." "What?" "Arthur is changing his will next week," Julian said. "He keeps the drafts in a safe in his study. The combination is biometric, but he has a physical override key in his desk. I want you to get me that key. I want to see what he's planning before he signs it." "You want me to spy on him?" "I want you to help me protect my inheritance," Julian said. "If you do this, I'll keep your secret. I'll even give you a bonus when the old man kicks the bucket. If you refuse—" He gestured to the crowd. "I walk up to the microphone right now, announce that you are a fraud, and have the police waiting outside to arrest you for grand larceny and fraud. Your mother gets kicked out of the care facility tonight." He checked his Rolex. "You have until midnight to decide. Bring me the key, or go to jail." Julian patted her on the shoulder, gave her a charming wink, and walked away into the crowd. Elena stood alone in the middle of the ballroom, the emerald dress feeling like a straitjacket. The music swelled, a triumphant, joyous waltz, mocking the absolute terror that gripped her heart. She looked at Arthur, the man who had blackmailed her into this. She looked at Julian, the man who was now blackmailing her to betray him. She was a waitress caught in a war between billionaires, and no matter who won, she was going to be the casualty. Unless— Elena looked down at the champagne glass in her hand. Her waitress instincts kicked in. She remembered the layout of the house. She remembered the service corridors she had seen the maids using. She had until midnight. She wasn't going to give Julian the key, and she wasn't going to let Arthur control her anymore. Elena Vance drank the champagne in one gulp. It was time to stop serving and start playing the game. Elena moved through the crowded ballroom, the crystal flute of empty champagne dangling from her fingers. The clock on the wall read 11:15 p.m. She had 45 minutes before Julian's deadline. 45 minutes before he destroyed her life. Her mind raced. If she stole the key for Julian, he would own her. He would never let her go. He would bleed Arthur dry, and eventually he would dispose of Eleanor too. But if she refused, he would expose her. She looked across the room. Arthur was sitting in a velvet chair, looking pale. He was holding a handkerchief to his mouth. He looked old, vulnerable. For the last week, she had seen him as a monster who blackmailed her. But tonight, seeing him surrounded by sharks like Julian and Victoria, she realized something else. Arthur was lonely. He was a man who had built an empire, but had no one to leave it to who actually cared about him, rather than his bank account. Elena made a decision. She wasn't a thief. She was a daughter who loved her mother, and she wasn't going to let a snake like Julian win. She walked straight past the service corridor, past the library, and went directly to Arthur. "Excuse me, Governor," Elena said, interrupting the politician Arthur was speaking to. "Grandfather, I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Arthur looked up, annoyance flashing in his eyes, but he saw the steel in Elena's expression. He excused himself and allowed Elena to wheel him into a quiet alcove near the terrace doors. "This had better be important, Elena. You're interrupting business." "Julian knows," Elena said, breathless. "He went to the pharmacy. He has a witness. He knows I'm a waitress." Arthur's face didn't change. He stared out at the rain-slicked terrace. I assumed he would find out eventually. Julian is efficient when he smells money. He blackmailed me, Elena continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. He told me that if I don't steal the override key to your safe by midnight, he's going to announce to everyone that I'm a fraud and have me arrested. Arthur turned his head slowly to look at her. His blue eyes pierced her. And I have 20 minutes left. So why are you telling me? Arthur asked softly. Why aren't you in my study stealing the key? It would save your skin. It would save your mother. Because he's a vulture, Elena spat out, surprised by her own anger. And I might be a desperate waitress who stole medicine, but I'm not a traitor. I won't help him hurt you. Arthur stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. The sounds of the orchestra drifted in from the other room. Finally, the old man let out a long sigh, his shoulders sagging. You passed, he whispered. Elena blinked. What? The pharmacy clerk, Arthur said. He didn't talk to Julian because he remembered you. He talked to Julian because I paid him to. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. You set me up? I had to know, Arthur said, his voice regaining some of its strength. I can buy loyalty, Eleanor. I can buy silence. But I cannot buy integrity. I needed to know if you would sell me out to save yourself. If you had gone to the study to steal that key, my security team would have intercepted you, and you would be in a police car right now. He reached out and took her hand. His skin was dry and papery. But you came to me. You chose the hard path. You're a manipulate old bastard, Elena said, tears stinging her eyes. I am, Arthur agreed, but I am a manipulate old bastard who is going to save you. Julian has no power here. The pharmacy footage is gone. The clerk is on a plane to Hawaii. Julian has hearsay. Nothing more. Arthur stood up, leaning heavily on his cane. Come, it is midnight. Let's go wish my nephew a good evening. They walked back into the ballroom, just as the grandfather clock chimed 12. Julian was standing by the bar, checking his watch. When he saw Elena walking with Arthur, his smile faltered. Arthur steered them directly toward Julian. Julian! Arthur boomed, his voice carrying over the music. Elena tells me you've been telling her some fascinating stories about her past. Julian froze. He looked at Elena, his eyes narrowing into slits. He realized instantly that she had confessed. I was merely trying to get to know my new cousin, Arthur, Julian said smoothly, though a vein in his forehead pulsed. Well, get to know this, Arthur said, leaning in close, his voice dropping to a lethal growl. I am changing the will tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. The entire estate, including the controlling interest in Penhaligon Industries, is going to Elena. You get the ski lodge in Aspen and nothing else. The color drained from Julian's face. You can't do that. The board— I am the board, Arthur roared, silencing the nearby guests. Get out of my house, Julian. Take your wife and your greed and get out. Julian stared at Elena. The hatred in his eyes was so raw, so physical, that Elena took a step back. You think you've won, Julian whispered to her. But you have no idea what game you're playing, little waitress. You're just a pawn. He turned on his heel and stormed out, Victoria trailing behind him, looking terrified. Arthur patted Elena's hand. Well done. Now, enjoy the party. You've earned it. But as Elena watched Julian's car tail lights disappear down the driveway, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Julian hadn't looked defeated. He had looked desperate. And desperate men, as Eleanor knew better than anyone, were dangerous. The morning after the gala was grey and heavy with fog. The house was quiet. suffering from the collective hangover of the staff cleaning up the debris of wealth. Elena woke up at 7 or 3 a.m. She felt lighter than she had in weeks. Julian was gone. Arthur trusted her. Today the will would be signed, and in 6 months she would have enough money to take care of her mother forever. She dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and jeans and went downstairs to the breakfast room. The house was unusually silent. Usually, she could hear Mrs. Galloway barking orders at the maids or the clatter of pans in the kitchen. Today, nothing. She walked into the dining room. Breakfast was set. Silver warmers with eggs and bacon, fresh coffee, but Arthur wasn't there. "Arthur?" she called out. No answer. A cold prickle of unease ran down her spine. Arthur was a creature of habit. He was always at the table by 7:30 a.m., reading the Wall Street Journal. She walked toward the library. The door was slightly ajar. "Arthur, are you—" She pushed the door open and screamed. Arthur was lying on the floor near the fireplace. His face was an unnatural shade of grey, his eyes wide and unseeing, his mouth open in a silent gasp. A shattered glass of brandy lay near his hand, a dark stain spreading on the Persian rug. "Arthur!" Elena rushed to him, dropping to her knees. She checked for a pulse. It was faint, thready. He was alive, but barely. "Help! Someone help!" she screamed, fumbling for her phone to call 911. Suddenly, the library doors burst open. But it wasn't the maids. It wasn't the butler. It was Julian, and behind him were 2 uniformed police officers. "There she is!" Julian shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Elena. "She poisoned him. I told you. Grab her!" Elena froze, the phone in her hand. "What? No! I found him like this. We need an ambulance." "Get away from him," one of the officers barked, rushing forward and pulling Elena roughly away from Arthur's body. "He's having a heart attack," Elena cried, struggling. "Check his pulse." "Paramedics are on the way, Mum," the officer said, snapping handcuffs onto her wrists. The cold metal bit into her skin. "You are under arrest." "For what?" Elena screamed. "I didn't do anything." "Attempted murder," Julian said, stepping into the room. He looked at Arthur's prone body with a mask of mock concern, but his eyes were gleaming with triumph. "And grand larceny." "What are you talking about?" "We received a call from Mr. Penhaligon's security team," the second officer said, holstering his taser. "They reported that the safe was accessed at 3 a.m. Valuable bearer bonds and the blue diamond cufflinks are missing." "I didn't touch the safe," Elena protested. "Then you won't mind if we search your room," Julian said smoothly. "Go ahead," Elena yelled. "You won't find anything." The paramedics arrived, swarming over Arthur. They loaded him onto a stretcher, shouting medical jargon. Cardiac arrest, possible toxicity, pupils fixed. Elena watched helplessly as the only person who could save her was wheeled out into the rain. "Let's go upstairs," the officer said, dragging Eleanor by the arm. They marched her up the grand staircase to the east wing. Her bedroom door was open. Her clothes were thrown everywhere. "Look at this," Julian said, reaching under her mattress. He pulled out a thick stack of papers and a velvet box. Elena's knees buckled. "Bearer bonds worth $2 million, Julian said, flipping through the papers. He opened the box. The diamond cufflinks Arthur had shown her on the first night glittered inside. "You planted those!" Elena screamed. "He put them there. He hates me." "Ms. Vance," the officer said sternly, "you have the right to remain silent." "She's a fraud," Julian told the officers, his voice dripping with sadness. "She claimed to be my cousin. We had our suspicions. My uncle was about to cut her out of the will this morning. She must have panicked. She poisoned his brandy and raided the safe." "That's a lie," Elena sobbed. "He was going to give me everything." Why would he give everything to a waitress he met a week ago? Julian asked, raising an eyebrow. Officer, she works at Miller's Steakhouse. She has massive debt. Her mother is dying and needs money. She saw an old man and took advantage. The narrative was perfect. It was logical. It fit every prejudice the police had. The desperate poor girl preying on the wealthy benefactor. Elena Vance, you are under arrest for attempted murder, theft over $1 million and fraud, the officer recited. They dragged her down the stairs. The staff, Maria, the butler, the cook, were lined up in the hallway, watching. They didn't look sympathetic. They looked betrayed. As they shoved her into the back of the police cruiser, Julian leaned down to the window. The rain was running down his face, but he didn't blink. I told you, Elena, he whispered through the glass. It's easy to fall in this house. He tapped the glass twice. Enjoy prison. Don't worry about your mother. I'll make sure she's evicted from the care facility by noon. The car pulled away. Elena watched the massive iron gates of 4200 Skyline Belvedere close behind her, locking her out of the life she almost had. She was alone. She had no money, no lawyer, and the only man who knew the truth was in a coma, likely dying from poison that Julian had undoubtedly slipped into his drink. She looked down at her hands. The cuffs were tight. She wasn't Elena Penhaligon anymore. She was just Elena Vance, the waitress who flew too close to the sun. But as the police car merged onto the highway, a cold, hard resolve settled in Elena's stomach, replacing the panic. Julian had made one mistake. He thought she was just a waitress. He thought she was weak. But waitresses knew how to handle difficult customers. They knew how to listen. And they knew that the customer is not always right. She closed her eyes and remembered the note Arthur had left her. The first note. I know what you did. She needed to think like Arthur. She needed to stop being the victim. Wait, she thought. The cufflinks. Arthur had given her the cufflinks on the first night. He told her to steal them. He had touched them. She had touched them. But if Julian planted them, his fingerprints would be on them too. It was a slim chance, a $2 chance. But it was all she had. The interrogation room at the Seattle Central Precinct smelled of stale coffee and fear. Elena sat at the metal table, her hands still cuffed. She had been processed, fingerprinted, and stripped of her dignity. The door buzzed and opened. Elena looked up, expecting the detectives or perhaps Julian coming to gloat. Instead, it was Marcus Sterling. He looked as pristine as ever, his suit unwrinkled, his briefcase heavy leather. He sat down opposite her and placed a single file on the table. "Mr. Sterling," Elena rasped, "if you're here to get me to sign a confession for Julian, you can go to hell." Marcus adjusted his glasses. "I am not here for Julian. I am here representing my client." "Your client is in a coma," Elena snapped, "and his nephew is framing me for it." "My client," Marcus corrected gently, "is you." Elena stared at him. "What?" "Arthur anticipated this," Marcus said. "He told me that if anything happened to him, and if Julian pointed the finger at you, I was to represent you immediately. He also told me to ask you a specific question." Marcus leaned forward. "Do you still have the $2? Elena frowned, confused. "The tip from the restaurant?" "Yes. The 2 $1 bills he left under the plate." I think so," Elena stammered. "I put them in my wallet that night. I was going to frame them as a reminder of how cruel rich people can be. My purse is in the evidence locker." Marcus nodded to the guard at the door. "Retrieve the prisoner's personal effects. Immediately." 10 minutes later, the plastic evidence bag was tossed onto the table. Marcus opened it with surgical precision. He pulled out Elena's cheap wallet and fished out the 2 crumpled, grease-stained dollar bills. Arthur Penhaligon was a paranoid man, Marcus explained, smoothing the bills out on the table. He didn't trust digital servers. He didn't trust clouds. He didn't trust safes that could be cracked. He trusted physical objects that looked like trash. Marcus pulled a small UV light keychain from his pocket. He clicked it on and shone the purple light over the face of George Washington on the first dollar bill. Elena gasped. Glowing in bright blue ink across the bill were numbers. 192 168 011. He shone the light on the second bill. Pass. ELENAVANCE. What is that? Elena whispered. It's an IP address to a local hardwired server, Marcus said, a rare smile touching his lips. And the password. Arthur had a hobby, Elena. He collected antique chess sets, specifically the one in the library. The rook, Elena realized. He was staring at it when I found him. The black rook on the library table isn't just a piece, Marcus said. It contains a high-definition, motion-activated camera with an independent power source. It uploads to a private server that only Arthur can access. Or, he tapped the dollar bills, someone with the keys. Marcus opened his laptop. He typed in the IP address. He entered the password. Elena Vance. A video file loaded. The timestamp was 6:45 a.m. that morning. Elena and Marcus watched in silence. On the screen, the library was quiet. Arthur was reading. Then the door opened. Julian walked in. "Uncle." Julian's voice came through the laptop speakers, tinny but clear. "I brought you a peace offering, your favorite brandy." "I don't want your peace, Julian," Arthur replied. "I want you out." "Drink first," Julian insisted, pouring the glass. The camera caught it all. Julian turning his back to Arthur. Julian slipping a small vial of clear liquid into the glass. Julian handing it to the old man. Arthur took the glass. He looked at it. He looked at Julian. "To family," Arthur said, and drank. The video continued. Arthur collapsing. Julian watching him fall, waiting, checking his watch. Then Julian going to the safe, typing in the code, removing the bonds and the cufflinks. Then Julian walking out, only to return minutes later with the police, acting the part of the distraught nephew. "He knew," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. Arthur knew the drink was poisoned. He looked right at him and drank it anyway. "He gambled," Marcus said softly. He knew that was the only way to catch Julian red-handed. Attempted murder is a life sentence. Fraud is a slap on the wrist. Arthur risked his life to make sure Julian could never hurt you or the company again. Marcus closed the laptop. He stood up and picked up the $2 bills. "I'm going to show this to the district attorney. I suggest you get comfortable, Ms. Vance. You're going to be walking out of here in about an hour." 3 months later, the rain had finally stopped in Seattle. The sun was shining on the manicured lawn of the Penhaligon estate. Elena sat in the garden, holding a cup of tea. She wasn't wearing a designer dress. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. She felt like herself again. The sound of a wheelchair whirring on the pavement made her turn. Arthur Penhaligon came down the path. He looked thinner, frailer, and he had a permanent tremor in his left hand, a lingering side effect of the digitalis toxicity. But he was alive. "You're drinking that swill again," Arthur grumbled, eyeing her tea. "I told you we have Darjeeling." "I like Earl Grey," Elena smiled, setting the cup down. "How are you feeling?" "Like I drank poison," Arthur quipped. He parked his wheelchair next to her. "Sterling tells me the trial starts next week. Julian is pleading insanity." "It won't work," Elena said. "We have the video." "We do?" Arthur nodded. He looked out over the grounds. "And your mother?" "She's home," Elena said, her smile widening. "The surgery was a complete success. She's walking the dog today." "Good, good." Arthur reached into his pocket. He pulled out a black leather wallet. "I owe you something," he said. "You've given me enough," Elena said. "You paid the medical bills. You cleared my name." "I owe you for the service," Arthur said seriously. "That night at the restaurant, I never paid the tip." He pulled out 2 crisp, new $100 bills and placed them in her hand. "That's for the steak," he said. Then he placed the 2 crumpled, UV-marked $1 bills on top of them. "And these," Arthur said, his eyes twinkling, "are for the lesson. Never judge the value of something by the number printed on it. Sometimes $2 is worth more than $1 billion. Elena laughed. She took the 2 old bills. "I'm framing these," she said. "You should," Arthur replied. "Now push me back inside. I'm hungry, and I hear the new waitress we hired doesn't know how to serve a proper steak. I might need you to train her." Elena stood up and grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. "On one condition," she said. "What's that?" "If she makes a mistake," Elena said, "we tip her 20%. Everyone deserves a break." Arthur grunted, a small smile hiding in the corners of his mouth. "Fine, but no sparkling water from the tap." As Eleanor pushed the billionaire back toward the mansion that was now her home, she touched the pocket where the $2 sat. They were just paper, but they were the paper that had bought her freedom, her mother's life, and a family she never expected to find. What a roller coaster. From a struggling waitress to the heir of an empire, Elena's story proves that integrity is the only currency that truly matters. Arthur Penhaligon might have been a billionaire, but he was poor in the things that counted until he met Elena. And Julian? Well, he learned the hard way that you can inherit money, but you can't inherit class. The most powerful part of this story is the $2 tip. It started as an insult, a symbol of Elena's worthlessness in the eyes of the elite. But in the end, it became the key to her salvation. It reminds us that even the smallest things, when backed by the truth, can topple giants. What would you have done if you found that note under your plate? Would you have gone to the mansion or run to the police? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of twists, betrayal, and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a new story. We upload new dramas every week. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.